You're busy, you've got a decent practice, but nobody wants to be decent. You want to be great, and you want to have a great practice. So how did the most productive, profitable dentist in the nation balance real life, work, and profits, and somehow make it all seem fun? Well, it comes down to simple, everyday practices. So grab a lunch, join us as we chat with top clinicians and influencers to discover their formula for uncommon success. Are you ready? Then it's time to explore everyday practices with Vicki McManus-Peterson and Dr. Chad Johnson.
David, I have a couple questions for you. For dentists, I mean, since you talk with a good majority of them in your CPA practice and whatnot for Prosperident, are there any favorite books that you're reading on leadership lately? Not your book, so we'll take that off the table for now. But are there any books that you've run across that have really hit you hard in the last year?
Well, Chad, that's a great question. The book that I'm reading right now that is resonating with me personally and might find a place with some of your audience as well is called Leadership and Self-Deception: Getting Out of the Box.
Ooh.
David, I have that right now. That is my next, I'm not kidding you, that's my next leadership book to read. Of all the books that we've heard, I have that one. I took it to Dominican Republic with me and ended up not reading it yet, so it's right there for me. Tell us more, David. This has been highly recommended.
It's an interesting read, and it really, the theme is whether you treat people who you deal with, whether they're clients or people in your personal life or people on your team, as people or as objects. When I started thinking about it, and it's laid out in an interesting way. I mean, the whole thing is kind of a big case study, and it takes you through this employment relationship where somebody's hired newly in a senior position in a big company, and the top management kind of takes them aside and says, "We're going to work through this with you."
So the point is not to treat people as objects or to treat people as objects.
The point is that most of us, without realizing it, treat people sometimes as objects or a means to an end, as opposed to thinking about them as people.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of a neat construction. And as I've been reading it, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through it now, I find myself saying, yeah, I do that. And I really had no awareness that I was.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a deeply powerful sentiment for business owners, because so many days we are stuck with P&Ls in front of us. We are looking at, how to pull more down to the bottom line. And I had a business professional one time to me brag. He said he eliminated 50 lines from his P&L. He was really excited for what that equated to. And it took me a minute. There's a lot of naivety to myself. It took me a minute to catch up and realize that he meant 50 people.
Human beings. Yeah.
Yes. And it just floored me to my core. So when you say people as objects, that there couldn't have been a harsher example to me in that moment, that this person was giddy about eliminating 50 people in the organization.
And on kids' movies and stuff like that, Reagan, as you know, the bad guy in a movie, a lot of times is the one that's like going to bulldoze down the family farm and put in a high rise, something or another. And he's like, and this is going to make my profits and stuff like that. And you think, surely no one's like that in person, but then you met this person in person and you're like, oh,
it's like a Hallmark Christmas movie in the making.
Yes.
Yeah. The theme of this book isn't necessarily that people are like that, but just that people, they lose some sense of self-awareness as they do things.
Yes.
And, if you think about people who you either work really closely with or in your personal life, a lot of the communication happens, I would say, with people's brains switched off. In other words, you have somebody in your practice who's Debbie Downer, and we've all met Debbie. And before Debbie even opens her mouth to say something, you have this prediction of what she's going to say.
Right.
And are you really listening to Debbie? Are you understanding where she's coming from? Are you valuing the perspective that she brings? Or is it like, oh God, I know exactly what she's going to say. I don't even have to listen.
That's a really hard lesson. Do we even value our Debbie Downers?
I think we all have a little bit of Debbie Downer in us at times, but David, my takeaway from that is someone with a recurring pattern of that mentality, do we switch off our brains? And I think absolutely we do. If they're going to, the office is too hot, the office is too cold, something outside, and you sort of, the brain processes so fast and it's always trying to get to its quickest solution, which is really, survival, kind of a fight or flight.
Sure.
So if it writes it off to force your brain to go in that different direction and be fully present, that is a lot harder than it sounds.
Listening takes effort, and humans are lazy. I mean, we all want to free up our brain to do something else.
Right. It's efficiency. I guess the nice way of looking at it.
Yeah. Well, okay. Efficiency. Yeah, that's good.
Well, it's both. It's lazy. It's efficient. It's just organically, that's what humans do. And a lot of times it works to our advantage. When you go into autopilot, it's just like, do you think about when you tie your shoes? It's like, no, you shouldn't have to. There shouldn't be brain space for that. You just tie your shoes, and that's efficiency in humans. But then when it's, hi, how are you? Oh, fine. Hi, how are you? You just pass on. That can be a problem.
I mean, how many times do you get in your car and you go somewhere and you get to the destination, and if somebody asked you, well, which route did you take? You're not sure.
Yeah.
Or it's the same one that I always take.
Yeah.
Boy, I think you both have given really good examples on how easy embezzlement can happen.
Yeah.
By route of a different way, because if your bills are getting paid and your team's getting paid and nobody's screeching at the door, from phone calls coming in, or the ones that are coming in are being not received by you, your brain would just go on autopilot due to laziness and or efficiency, to Chad's testament. So if I'm a dentist, would it be enough for me, David, to say, I'm going to hire Prosperident, or I'm going to hire a firm to come in once a year and go through my books? Is that enough? It could be too late at that point.
It's not something we'd recommend. And I guess the dental equivalent would be the patient who says to the dentist, you know what, I know the enamel on this tooth is fine right now, but it's going to decay sooner or later. So why don't you just drill it out and fill it now, and I won't have to worry about it.
That's a scary one.
If the thought of embezzlement really drives somebody crazy and they can't sleep at night and that will help them, then of course we'll do it. But the concept of treating asymptomatic dentists is as unpleasant for me as the concept of drilling out perfectly good enamel is to a wet finger dentist.
Yes.
What I'd rather do is I'd rather help people put good systems in place, and the real purpose of those systems more than anything else is to alert them to when they might have a problem.
So to look for the symptoms. So like you said, you just hit on gold. Instead of reacting and saying, I'm asymptomatic, does your book address some of those symptoms that they can see?
It certainly does. And I'll be happy to talk to you about what some of the symptoms are. The ones that I try to focus dentists on are behavioral identifiers of embezzlement more so than financial ones.
Okay.
So again, when we're talking about how embezzlement is discovered, I mentioned already that about 20% of it comes through planning and 80% by accident. But I'll spin the numbers in a little different way. About a third of embezzlement is discovered because of financial indicators. So an example of a financial indicator might be that the day-end report doesn't line up with a bank deposit. 2/3 is uncovered by the behavior of the thief. And a lot of indicators, thieves typically want alone time in the practice, so they'll sort of work their schedule so that they can get there before everybody else, or stay late, or come in on Saturdays. They tend to be very possessive about their duties, and it'll even extend to their workspace and their computer. I very regularly hear from doctors who say, somebody else sat at Susie's computer the other day and Susie went ballistic. These people will not want to cross-train anybody else to do their job, because that creates the possibility that job gets divided and might make embezzlement a little harder. This will be even the person who will push back when the doctor says, it's time for us to upgrade from EagleSoft 18 to EagleSoft 19.
Something as minute as that.
Yeah, because whatever the embezzler has going on works in EagleSoft 18.
Yep.
They have no idea if 19 will shut it down or not, so they're like, I don't want this.
Because they had a vacation coming up that they're hoping to pay for.
Well, on that subject, Chad, a lot of embezzlers are reluctant to take vacation.
Oh yeah,
because they lose control over the flow of information.
Control. See, I'm just so naive. Naive.
I think the pattern, David, that you're showing in this is a resistance to change and a controlling mentality. So if you watch for areas of resistance, dentists, areas of resistance that would seem on the surface as would not cause a problem, and if it's something where you cannot apply a Debbie Downer mentality, like, oh, this person's always this way, or something, or maybe even if that
we understand nobody loves change.
Of course.
Nobody embraces change and says, great, I get to learn a whole new pattern of doing things that I think I was doing perfectly before, right? That doesn't exist. Let me personalize it though, Reagan. One of the big places where there's a behavioral marker for embezzlement is when the doctor says to the team, I have great news, I'm going to bring in a consultant. Consultants terrify embezzlers.
Because they'll be looking at everything.
Well, because they're not under the embezzler's spell the way the practice owner typically is.
Right.
And because they think of dentistry as a business more so than a healing art.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm a thief and the doctor says, we're going to bring in a consultant because I think we have room for improvement in some places. Thief says, doctor, no, that's a really bad idea. It's going to cost a lot of money. And I've heard about these consultants. They really don't accomplish much. And, so from the perspective of Productive Dentist Academy, and when I talk to any consultant, and I suspect I'll get this from you as well. When I talk to any consultant who's been at it for a few years, they all have a story. Yeah. The day I walked into this practice, the office manager quit.
Oh, yes. Ding, ding.
Yeah, I struck a nerve there, didn't I?
Yes. Well, I had my identity stolen once years ago from a company that I no longer worked at, and they still had my information, but he was my friend on Facebook. And so it was interesting that you said, speaking of vacation, he bought himself a luxury car and was touting all of these new things that he was getting. And I thought, wow, he really must have come into something, or, something's changed, because that's a lot of money, like maybe an inheritance. And long story short, he had stolen myself and a bunch of others' identities and had opened up. And then I got the phone call from the places that had taken out all this stuff in my name. And it was what a mess. Yeah. See, he didn't even break up with me on Facebook.
Oh, right? Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer.
Well, let's talk about, since we're almost there, the topic of why people steal.
Oh, sure.
People steal for two reasons: need or greed. So needy thieves have something going on in their life that's upset the family finances. And an example of that might be the person who's going through a divorce. Mm-hmm. And they're suddenly trying to float two households on the income that used to support one. Mm-hmm. And to add to their misery, they have a bunch of attorney bills. Mm-hmm. So that person's stealing to keep the wolf away. Yep. Then you have greedy thieves. And greedy thieves feel like they have a lot more value to the practice than what the doctor thinks. Mm-hmm. And they're stealing to take what they think the doctor should be paying them in the first place.
Yeah. To justify their value.
Yep.
They tend to look at their doctor as basically a high functioning moron with good hands,
which happens a lot.
Well, that's a topic for another day. But
well, no, I think it's fair enough to say that, like, I've seen that more than once. It's not like when you run across a bunch of friends and people that work in dentistry that, it's like, well, you know what? I've run across one person that acts like that. It's like, no, I've seen it a good amount. So it does happen.
Whether it's true or not, it's irrelevant.
It is. Because it's not necessarily always true. I think some of us know some colleagues that it's like, no, that is true with them. But the fact is, it is that staff person that wants to entitle themselves to, like, listen, they're already making a ton of money. I've got bills to pay. And the fact is, like, the guy's a kind of a moron anyway. I'm really helping him be as good as he is, because, like, he should be thanking me, but you know what? He doesn't. And he doesn't appreciate the fact that I bring so much value. He'd be nothing if I weren't there. So actually, by me working there and taking a little bit of this, I'm doing him a service, and it's
that's it. There's a strong feeling of entitlement. The doctor's only successful because I keep her chair full, and then I collect the money when people leave it. And for a while, typically these people think the doctor's going to come to her senses and double Mary's salary.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they realize that that's never going to happen. And then they steal.
Yep. And then when they steal, the doctor goes, man, I don't have enough money to give anyone a raise. So it's self-fulfilling.
When needy people steal, they feel bad about it, but they just don't think they have a choice. The greedy people, and there's a fair amount of sociopathy in them, they're entitled. And it's interesting how they spend money. I mean, needy people, when they steal, they buy groceries or they make the mortgage payment.
Sure.
When the greedy folks steal, they spend in ways that scratch their ego deficit.
Mm-hmm.
So they will buy expensive cars, or they'll buy designer clothes, or they'll get cosmetic surgery, because it's all about the ego deficit
and the image.
Yeah, the image. I tell a story about one of our thieves, and she was stealing, and then she won $3 million in the state lottery.
Whoa.
If most people working in a dental practice won $3 million, they'd quit their job. And on the way out the door, they'd say what they really wanted to say to the dentist. This lady did neither of those things. She kept working.
I can't give up that income.
I was just going to say, I don't know, David. That's, you put that in savings.
Yeah. But here's the really neat part. After she won the $3 million, the amount she was stealing each month increased.
No.
Because at that point, if she gets caught, she's already got something in the bank.
Well, that's part of it. I'd suggest to you gently that for a lot of people, stealing produces a dopamine release.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, they, like bungee jumping would. I mean, they're taking a risk and they're getting away with it, and they get a rush from doing that.
That makes sense.
I think this lady wanted that rush.
Reagan, listen to this.
What?
You know how yesterday I was telling you when I had burned myself with that gasoline fire, that afterwards I ended up I was speeding horribly for a while. And David, it was just really weird because I'd be speeding and I'd be like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
I couldn't really wrap my head, and I had 4 or 5 different explanations of why and whatnot. But I think the trauma from the gas fire was enough that Reagan, if you remember, I said, I think it just messed me up for a little while to figure out what my value was, and even just physiologically or chemically or whatever.
You said survivor guilt, and that was what resonated with me. Was you had just you had sort of gypped death in a certain sense.
Yes.
Like you had just skirted this, and there's a lot of probably cognizant processing that goes on subconsciously to ourselves that kind of eke out, and they come out in different ways. And so if you apply that to somebody who had just, if David was saying that you get a dopamine rush. So if you're in the greed category and you get that dopamine rush, and then that person wins $3 million, and we already know, there's lots of articles online that say, people who win the lottery, they often have they tend to have a gambling mindset anyway, and most of them lose it.
Yeah.
Most of them lose it. So then the dopamine hit from that must have just made that person feel invincible.
There was a study I read, and it measured the percentage of people who had won a big lottery winning, more than $5 million. The percent of them who went bankrupt in the next 10 years was 50.
I'm surprised it's not more. No, I'm serious. I'm surprised it's not more.
Yeah.
I've heard people say, over the years, always if you win even $1 million, that mindset is I'm set for life. Yeah. I can quit my job. I can do whatever. So for this person, they won, and are they in the Hall of Shame?
Yes, they are.
They had to keep. So it wasn't even. I don't even know, David, if it was a need or a greed, but it was a desire for that continual dopamine hit that they were scratching. It wasn't even to me.
No, it's clearly a greed thing. I mean, it's not need based for them. Again, right. Needy people are trying to correct a financial issue.
Yes, it's more of a desperation thing.
Needy people have an emotional deficit. They're not stealing strictly because they need to. They're stealing because they choose to. They want to.
So, dentists, what I'm hearing David say is, if you feel like you're asymptomatic, don't rush in. Don't rush in and start getting overcritical and freaking out. But pay attention to that 2/3. If you're not having a financial indicator showing up in that 1/3, go towards that 2/3 and do be aware. So instead of
furthermore, what I was thinking, Reagan, was the Dave Ramsey thought that, when he's one of the programs that he implements or pushes for people to do is like employers to check into having Financial Peace University for their employees, because he said, a majority of personal problems are financial, and therefore they pile over into your work. And so if you wanted to get rid of the people in the desperation category,
the needs category,
you could also talk to them more about living within their means, setting up savings, feeling like they're above their, so you can turn it a different way. Yeah. So that's another way to mitigate that risk, David, right?
Yeah. And if if you're a dentist and you know that one of your staff has financial issues,
right.
To communicate with them, to maybe make resources available to them that they wouldn't otherwise realize were there. I mean, I knew one of my employees was in trouble. And what I did was I said to him, okay, I need you to go to talk to somebody. I'll pay for it. Because I don't want the inability to pay for that conversation with somebody who could help you financially to be the barrier. So I'll cover the cost, but I really need you to go and talk to somebody who will sit with you and say, here are your options. Here are the pros and cons of each. Let's make a plan. I don't expect them to report back to me. I mean, this is not I'm not trying to intrude into your finances.
Right.
But I know you have a problem. And I know that if it's not dealt with, it will sooner or later intrude into your ability to be a productive employee of mine. And, I care about you and I want to help you.
That's cool.
That's a proactive approach. That's a very Chad Johnson approach, if I say so myself, Chad.
It was innovative. That it's not like, absolutely. Hey, David, I want to wrap up with this one's my silly question. So, but I mean, it basically is one way for us to go from such a serious topic, that it's your livelihood and whatnot. And so I appreciate all the work that you're doing on behalf of dentists and people that are employing your services and just to be able to make up for a more ethical workplace. And that's great. So here's my question. You have to choose one or the other. You cannot choose both. Unless you choose both, then you break the rules and you're a rule breaker. So I'm afraid.
That's right.
Okay.
Please don't choose both.
I'm definitely curious about where this is going.
Well, we're going to have to find out on the next episode. No, I'm just kidding. You choose one or the other, bacon or eggs.
Bacon.
There it is. Okay,
ooh, that was
bacon.
direct.
Yeah. Well, Everyday Practices listeners, I appreciate you joining us today, talking with David Harris, CEO of Prosperident. And David, thank you very much for joining us today.
I had fun.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you, David, for your time. Hey, before we go, David, are there any events that you travel out to in the States? Are there any other ways for people to see and or hear and learn from you?
Absolutely. I speak typically 50 to 60 times a year.
Wow.
You can access our speaking calendar on our website, which is easy to remember. It's www.dentalembezzlement.com. And the only trick there is spelling embezzlement right, but
that's the first test.
So.
If you're not sure, Google will help you. So our speaking schedule is there. We also have a monthly newsletter that's free, and anybody who wants to get it is welcome to reach us through our website and ask to be put on the newsletter, and we're happy to oblige. So every month when that comes out, that has upcoming speaking dates as well.
Very cool.
Thank you, David.
No problem. Good to be here.
Bring your lunch or take us to the gym again next week to improve your everyday practices. Also, subscribe on iTunes, follow us on social media, and sign up for our email list. Now get out there and win with Everyday Practices.